Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. Today on the show, I've got Craig Hatkoff.
It wasn't until we really sat down that we'd say, okay, let's take a really hard look, because people probably don't traditionally think of religion as an area that's, ripe with innovation. But if you remember the following quote, every tradition that we have started off as an innovation.
This is another episode of Innovation and Leadership where we interview all kinds of high achievers, from world-class musicians to CEOs, authors, and pro athletes. Try to find the common elements of success no matter what you're working on. We've got a new book coming out soon. If you want to get an advance copy for free, please email me, jess@innovationandleadership.com, and just tell me in the email. Again, Jess, Jess, @innovationandleadership.com. And now on to the episode. Craig, thanks for making time.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, like I was saying before we started the show, I think we've got about 4 episodes worth of innovation out of you. So we'll try and squeeze as much as we can in today.
Okay.
But let's talk about. Well, I feel like you're going to do a better job of this. Can you list at least the top 5 things between Tribeca and the awards and the authorship and teaching, and can you list kind of the things that maybe you're most well known for?
Sure. I guess historically, the first part of my career was started off fairly traditional in the banking business, but quickly morphed into a less traditional, I think I'm going to use the phrase, an intrapreneur at what used to be the old chemical bank. And I was very active in my first career in financial engineering, new product development, innovation in the banking system. And this was particularly very much focused on the real estate industry, but then sort of crossed over into other industries. So one would be just a pretty interesting banking career. Ended up partnering with another very interesting, I'll call him innovator, an entrepreneur, a guy by the name of Sam Zell. Was partners with Sam for about probably close to 10 years in a mezzanine finance company that we started together. So that was sort of the first round one of the career. And by 1998, after my 5th financial crisis that I had endured during the banking system, I started to think about doing different things. I had a great career in real estate and finance, but I always had the itch to be, and I was doing very creative things, but it really wasn't a touch and feel. When you're in the finance business, the product is stuff you don't even really see very much. You're kind of moving money around and a lot of structuring and engineering in a financial sense. So one would be a career in finance and banking. When I left the sort of my banking and finance career, I got very involved initially in transitioning from a banker of 20 plus years into much more of an entrepreneurial role, and started a bunch of different startups, one of which we can talk about at some point, maybe in a different episode. But that's when I actually met Clay Christensen, who I know you're a fan of, and very much inspired by Clay. That sort of spilled over into almost everything else I've done since. But so I started moving into the entrepreneurial space. At the same time as I was cultivating a relationship with Clay, by 2001, when September 11th came, that was really the beginning of the Tribeca Film Festival, which was an effort to bring people back to the streets of Lower Manhattan after September 11th. And so I was one of the 3 co-founders, along with Jane Rosenthal and Robert De Niro. And we thought we would do the festival for 1 year just to get some people back down. And here we are, going 17 years later, or thereabouts, going into our 17th Tribeca Film Festival next April.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you very much. As we say, the measure of success is we are still standing after 17 years. But it's been a very interesting process and transformation of just even what's happened in the entire entertainment, communications, and media space since the festival started, and we can maybe talk about that later. Along the way, just as sort of an interesting, started off as a family hobby with my daughters. We started writing some children's books, and it turned out to be a fairly significant hobby And we've now, with both my daughters in different combinations, we've published about a dozen children's books, including a very popular series based on real life animal stories. And while I'm not sure I envision myself as a fairly traditional author in the children's publishing space, we started to combine both the digital as well as the publishing / analog side. And so we've become fairly well established, particularly in the educational space, with our series of children's books. So I guess that would make number 2 as a children's author. I think the Tribeca Disruptive Innovation Awards, which we can talk about a little bit later, now going into its 9th year, think of it as almost an offshoot. It's currently part of the festival, but very much its own platform that embraces the work of Clay Christensen, and as he's referred to it, we're a bit of the advanced research and development arm of some of his thinking, particularly how innovation applies to non-traditional domains. So we tend to think of innovation has largely been associated with Silicon Valley apps and technology and chips and all the latest. Think of it as industrial and technological products, but we've started applying the principles of innovation to domains as far-flung as religion, spirituality, ethical and moral development, and things of that nature. So I think the sort of that third platform, I guess, so that's where we are, is really a very, very interesting platform for the cutting edge of innovation. So, and then I guess on the side, I'm a pretty avid musician and have actually written a rock opera that's under development based on the life of Galileo. So that's a pretty well kept secret. So hopefully in the next year or two, maybe you'll hear some more about it. But and then the rest, I guess, innovation, publishing, some music thrown in, Tribeca, and I'm on a number of boards, both public companies as well as not-for-profits.
Well, and can we talk about one of them for 1 second, the Desmond Tutu Peace Foundation? That sounds incredible.
Yes, and that's we had a relationship with the Archbishop who came to Tribeca. I believe it was the 2nd year, and I met some of the folks in addition to the Archbishop, and they invited me to go on the board, which I've been on, oh boy, probably close to 12 years. And it's fascinating. This is really the U.S. arm of one of our great spiritual leaders, Nobel Prize winner, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who is really quite inspirational in that same category, I'd say, as the Dalai Lama and Nelson Mandela. So Tutu is quite a large figure, and it's been fascinating to, how do you, in the United States, he's based in South Africa, but in the United States, how do you preserve not just the legacy, but also what is the wisdom that can be shared from his body of work and his life story?
No, he's a incredible thinker, and I think Nelson Mandela obviously deserves all the credit he's gotten, but the nature of those two working together, it's almost like Jordan and Pippen to me. Like I'm not sure everybody recognizes just how much thought leadership he's created and set such an incredible example for the rest of us to follow.
Yeah, he's really quite incredible, and so dynamic and energized. He's getting on. He's not a young man anymore, but he's still very, very active.
Yeah, well,
Great
and
inspiration.
no kidding. Well, and I do kind of want to focus on the Disruptor Awards here today. Can you talk a little bit about this? How Tribeca Film Festival ended up into like the story of how the Disruptor Awards came about?
Yeah, it was kind of a two-prong, I guess, result or effort. One is we were building out the film festival. Sort of around 2007, I became very active with Clay Christensen, who is also probably less known, but has been an elder of the Mormon Church. And we started talking about innovation that was spurred by another relationship that will come up as we go through, but with Erwin Kula, who was an 8th-generation rabbi. And so between Clay, Erwin Kula, and myself, we started sort of actually it was a Clinton Global Initiative to explore applying disruptive innovation theory to religion and spirituality. And it was probably the first time Clay had been thinking along those lines, but it wasn't until we really sat down that we'd say, okay, let's take a really hard look, because people probably don't traditionally think of religion as an area that's ripe with innovation. But if you remember the following quote, every tradition that we have started off as an innovation. So it's one of the lessons I've learned from this. But we started the Disruptor Awards. The first year, so it was 2010. It was a little bit of, I think, the phrases we would use in the innovation space that you'll be familiar with it was our rapid prototyping and our beta test. And it just kind of organically came up as an event at Tribeca. The first year it was 65 people in a screening room, very interesting group of honorees. Clayton came down, and it was really the first exposure to many people in the entertainment industry to what was really going on. And this is really at the stage where Netflix was coming into its own, Amazon was becoming a behemoth, and it was a very interesting time to start looking at the principles of innovation and how it impacted not only the entertainment industry, but the broader world at large.
Well, I mean, I looked through your honorees list, and how many have there been so far, by the way?
The last count I heard was around 175 honorees.
Yeah.
We usually about, roughly 15 to 20 plus honorees a year, and it's an interesting show. It's really more about the storytelling. So each one of the honorees has their own amazing story or narrative, but if you curate it in a way to provide sort of like what I'll call the meta narrative of the awards, it's really quite provocative. And the words quirky, idiosyncratic, edgy has been often applied to the way we do our awards.
So I want to hear more about this, because you've got, I mean, such big names involved: founder of Twitter's, founder of Wikipedia, Acumen, the MakerBot, 3D printer guys. I mean, you guys have really got a who's who for people that are inventing the future. One I thought was really interesting on here was the Formula One, the E series, the electric series of Formula One. Can you talk about that one for just a minute?
Yeah, sure. It was very interesting. I don't remember the exact genesis of the relationship, but when I started hearing about, these are the electric cars that at some point in time will drive just as fast as the traditional Formula One cars. But when you think about what they were doing, the most interesting part of it, well, one, obviously, it was Formula E had some very high-profile names, people like Leo DiCaprio that was involved in it. It was building a league unto itself of these Formula E, cars and teams. But one of the most interesting parts is there is no noise from, it's not like going to a NASCAR race where the sounds are deafening. These are very quiet cars, and it really changes the entire experience. And one of the things I thought was fascinating is because there was not that background noise of the humming of the cars, they started introducing music, which is kind of it's one of those interesting things of connecting two slightly disconnected thoughts, but it changed the nature of the experience. And they were doing, it was fascinating. But it's when you hear, electric cars, the future, 10 years ago, we would have said electric cars may or may not, we'll clearly have electric cars, but when would they actually have the crossover where that then becomes the mainstream and gas-powered cars start declining? If you saw, I think it was even yesterday, about China pushing for all-electric cars, and then obviously along the way we've got our friend, Elon Musk doing Tesla. But it was just what is something that makes the whole notion of electric cars accessible and more understandable.
And cool, right? Well,
it was very cool. Yes.
We're closing in on the end of part one, and I'm excited for part two of the interview, where I want to dig more into kind of where you hope this all goes. But besides people going to disruptorawards.com, where else can people learn more about the Disruptor Foundation and connect with you, or what would your call to action be today?
Well, I think the website is set up. It's very informational, so you can go through all of the honorees and all of the fellows. That would, I'd say just a Google search for Disruptor Awards or Tribeca Disruptive Innovation Awards will pull up some pretty interesting things. Lots of interesting honorees and photos and blurbs along the way.
Okay,
well, we're a relatively well kept secret. Not intentionally, so but we've really focused on building the community and creating a very interesting ecosystem. Yeah. So there's a lot of interaction from the honorees and our fellows, and we're looking to expand that. So that's kind of the future for us, is how do we build out this platform.
That's great. Well, this is a great place to end for part one. Everybody, please tune into part two of the interview. We're going to get more of the background, the story behind the story with Craig here. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Well, that's it for the episode. One other thing I wanted to tell you about, if you'll remember the guys from Convoy in episodes back, Ken Free and Trent Mano, I went on one of their CEO trips to New York, and I met a guy named Brent Thompson, very successful entrepreneur. He was former CEO of Jive Communications, big company now, I think $300 or $400 million. Anyways, he started a new company called blipbillboards.com. I'm super stoked they're a sponsor now. But I remember a year and some ago when I met him, I thought it was genius. Instead of having to buy 6 months or a year's worth of billboard for thousands of dollars, you can buy 8 seconds at a time for like 10 or 20 cents. You pick what billboard you want it on, what time of day you want it to run, and it just puts so much power in the hands of marketers and CEOs who want to try something and see if it works. You can buy as many or as few as you want, change it as many times as you want. I think now our podcast is being advertised on billboards in like 18 different states because we have these guys as sponsors. We're pretty excited about it. Hope you check out blipbillboards.com. Thanks.